Mr. Carter's house was the kind of place people often admired from the outside, but feared to step into. A wide stone mansion, with tall windows and silent halls that seemed to echo with nothing but the sound of emptiness. And though he had everything a man could dream of, success, wealth, and the respect of his city, he carried with him an unshakable loneliness that no deal or celebration could erase. And so when he adopted Maya, a quiet little girl with wide brown eyes who had already known too much sadness for her young age, he thought the silence of his home would be filled at last. Yet days turned into weeks, and the mansion still felt cold because Maya hardly spoke and rarely looked up when he was around. And though he tried in his own way to give her what he believed children wanted, clothes, toys, and her own decorated room, he never gave her what she needed most, which was time, attention, and the warmth of someone who truly cared. And as he returned each night from long hours at the office, briefcase in hand and phone still ringing with urgent voices, he barely noticed that the little girl was already asleep or sitting quietly in the corner of her room, holding her doll with a look of distance in her eyes. And he told himself that it was natural, that children sometimes took a while to open up, and that eventually she would laugh and run through the house as children were supposed to. But behind that hope there was a growing unease, for every now and then he caught her glancing at him as if she wanted to say something, yet swallowed the words before they could form. And he could not deny that her silence pressed against him like a question he was too afraid to answer. And in the stillness of the night, when even the servants had gone to bed, Mr. Carter would wander through the hallways, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors, and wonder if perhaps this house was too large for a child who had already lost too much, if perhaps she felt like a stranger in a place meant to be her home. And yet, instead of confronting those thoughts, he drowned himself in more work, more meetings, and more distractions, thinking he was providing for her by keeping the business thriving. But each time he glanced at her at breakfast, sitting quietly at the long table where the food was laid out like a feast, and saw her small hands pushing food around the plate without taking a bite, his chest tightened, though he always hurried off before he could say anything, convincing himself that he would talk to her later, when things were calmer. But later never came, and the house remained silent, its beauty hiding the truth that both man and child were living side by side, yet worlds apart. And if one listened closely to the walls at night, it was not laughter or conversation that filled the air, but the quiet sigh of a girl who did not know if she was truly wanted, and the restless pacing of a man who did not know how to bridge the distance between them. One evening, after a long day at the office filled with endless meetings and the constant buzz of phones, Mr. Carter returned home later than usual, his mind weighed down with numbers and plans, expecting the house to be as quiet as it always was. But as he stepped through the tall front doors, something felt different in the air, a kind of stillness that seemed heavier than before. And while he placed his briefcase down and loosened his tie, he noticed the faint sound of clinking from the kitchen, a place Maya rarely went to since the staff usually prepared everything for her. And curiosity mixed with unease pushed him forward until he reached the doorway and froze at the sight before him. For there, in the dim glow of the overhead light, sat Maya on the tiled floor, her small frame hunched over a silver dog bowl filled with leftover food scraps meant for the family pet. And with trembling hands, she scooped pieces into her mouth, as if she had not eaten all day, her eyes darting nervously like a child afraid of being caught doing something wrong. And Mr. Carter's heart slammed against his chest because he could not believe what he was seeing. This fragile little girl he had promised to care for, reduced to eating from the floor, like she was invisible in a home filled with riches. And for a moment he stood frozen, torn between disbelief and guilt, wondering how many nights she had done this in secret while he was too busy to notice. And as she lifted her face, crumbs on her lips and tears forming in her eyes, their gazes locked, and he saw, not just hunger but deep loneliness, staring back at him, a silent cry for something far greater than food. And though words formed at the edge of his lips, he could not speak, for shame pressed against his throat, reminding him that he had failed to see her pain when it was right in front of him. And, in that heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator, Mr. Carter realized that his grand house, his wealth, and all his business victories meant nothing if this child under his roof felt forgotten. And as Maya dropped the spoon she had been holding and wrapped her arms around her knees, like she expected him to be angry, he felt something inside him crack open, the kind of break that cannot be fixed with money. And though he wanted to rush forward and hold her, his feet remained stuck because he knew this was not just a shocking sight but a mirror reflecting the truth of how far apart they had grown. And it left him shaken, breathless, and desperate to understand how to make it right. For a long moment, after he saw Maya crouched on the floor, Mr. Carter could only stand frozen, his heart aching and his mind spinning, unsure of what to do or say. But then the silence broke in a way that shook him to the core. For the girl, who had never spoken since the day he had brought her home, slowly raised her teary eyes, lips trembling as if she was fighting an invisible weight, and in a voice so faint it was almost a whisper she spoke for the first time. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to bother you." And those few words, though broken and small, landed like thunder in his chest. leaving him stunned because he had believed for so long that her silence was unbreakable. Yet here she was apologizing, as if eating dog food was a crime instead of a desperate act of hunger. And his breath caught as he stepped forward, unable to hold back anymore, kneeling down beside her so his eyes met hers on the same level, realizing she had not only found her voice but had used it to express guilt, a guilt she should never have felt, and his hands shook as he reached out, gently moving the bowl aside, whispering her name with a tenderness he rarely showed anyone. And she flinched at first, not knowing what to expect, but when he placed his hand softly on her shoulder, she let out another phrase, this time a little clearer. I thought, you didn't want me, and those words broke him completely, unraveling the walls of pride, work, and distance he had built around himself, for he understood that her silence had not been emptiness but fear, the kind of fear that made a child believe love was fragile and could disappear at any moment. And as he held her close, feeling her tiny frame trembling against him, the truth became a heavy weight in his chest, that while he had given her a home and comfort in material ways, he had forgotten the one thing she truly needed, his presence, his love, his voice assuring her that she belonged. And as she spoke again, haltingly, but stronger now, telling him, I was hungry, but I didn't know if I should ask. He realized that these first words were not just sounds but confessions, the unlocking of her soul. And though the kitchen around them felt too quiet, too empty, the air was charged with a kind of sacred electricity, the beginning of something new, fragile yet powerful. And Mr. Carter, with tears welling in his eyes, whispered back promises he never thought he would have to say out loud, that she was wanted, that she was loved, that she would never need to hide her needs again. And as she leaned into him, her words still shaky but growing more certain, he knew the silence that had once filled his house had finally been broken, and in that fragile breaking lay the possibility of a bond far stronger than he had ever imagined. Mr. Carter stayed on the cold kitchen floor with Maya held against his chest, her first fragile words still echoing in his heart, and as he stroked her hair with trembling hands, he knew this moment could not end with empty promises. It had to be followed by action, something big enough to erase her doubts and show her that she was more than an afterthought in his busy world. And though he was a man known in the city for his wealth, his power, and his sharp decisions, none of those mattered to him now as much as the small girl who had once sat in silence. And with tears staining his shirt, he pulled back just enough to look into her eyes and told her, from today, things will be different. And she blinked at him with the hesitation of a child who had been disappointed too often. So he made a choice in that moment, a gesture that would change not only her life but his own. For the next morning, instead of rushing to his office as he always did, he canceled his meetings, left his assistants confused, and took Maya by the hand, guiding her into the city where he had built his empire. But this time he was not the businessman who barked orders and signed contracts. He was a father determined to make his daughter feel seen, and as they walked through a toy store, he told her to pick anything she wanted, watching her eyes widen at the shelves filled with colors. But when she timidly chose a small stuffed bear instead of the mountain of options, he understood that she had never truly believed she was allowed to want more. So he gently placed more in her basket until she smiled for the first time in weeks. And he realized the gesture was not about spending money but about teaching her she mattered. Yet his plan did not stop there, for he arranged a long dining table that evening, not for his business partners as usual, but for Maya alone, setting it with her favorite foods he had asked the chef to prepare. And when she sat at the head seat where he normally sat, he lifted his glass of juice and toasted to her, declaring in front of the household staff that she was the most important person in his life. And the silence that followed was heavy because no one had ever seen him place anyone above his work. Yet Maya's smile lit the room brighter than any chandelier, and when she whispered a thank you, her voice still trembling but stronger than before, the staff clapped softly, touched by the rare display of humility from a man who had once seemed untouchable. And later that night, as he tucked her into bed with the bear she had chosen, she asked, in a small but steady voice, "Will you be here tomorrow?" And though the question was simple, he knew it carried the weight of all her fears. So he bent down, kissed her forehead, and said firmly, "Yes, tomorrow and every day after." And as he turned off the light, he realized the greatest gesture he had ever made was not buying companies or building wealth, but giving his daughter the security of his presence, something no money could ever replace. And in the quiet of that night he knew his life had finally found its true purpose. The following weeks moved slowly but with a kind of warmth that neither Mr. Carter nor Maya had ever known before. For the house that once echoed with silence and formality began to change with the sound of her voice growing a little stronger each day. And though at first she spoke only in short words and hesitant sentences, he treated each syllable as if it were a treasure, listening with the patience of a man who had finally realized the true meaning of time. And one evening, as they sat together in the garden watching the sun sink low, Maya surprised him again by asking questions about her place in the world, about why her life had been so different before he came, and about whether he would always want her even when she made mistakes. And though his chest ached at the thought of her carrying such doubts, he pulled her gently onto his lap and told her that being wanted was not something she had to earn. It was simply what she deserved as his daughter, and as tears glistened in her eyes, he understood that love, spoken and shown, was the only lesson she had been waiting for all along. And yet this lesson stretched further than just the two of them, for Mr. Carter found himself sharing the story quietly with his staff, his colleagues, and even strangers, admitting openly that he had been blind for too long, thinking success was about numbers, when in truth it was about the people we choose to show up for. And those who heard him speak felt a stirring in their own hearts, for it was not every day that a man of his stature admitted his faults so humbly. And soon Maya became a living reminder to everyone around them that no matter how much wealth one held, it meant nothing if those closest to you felt invisible, and in that truth lay the deepest human lesson that dignity, love, and attention are not luxuries to be earned, but rights that every child, every person, is owed. And when Mr. Carter looked at his daughter now, laughing freely as she chased fireflies across the yard, he saw not just the girl who once ate from a dog's bowl, but the light that had taught him what it truly meant to be alive. And he promised himself silently that he would never let that lesson fade, for it had rebuilt his life in a way no fortune ever could, leaving him richer in the one way that mattered most: love.